The summer sun was sinking behind the tall pine trees that lined the edge of the cul-de-sac. Birds chirped their final songs of the day while the neighborhood looked deceptively peaceful. Marcus Johnson stood on the porch of his modest but well-kept home, sipping from a glass of sweet iced tea. For him, this house wasn't just brick and wood, it was a hard-earned dream, something he had worked for every hour since leaving the Navy. The scars of war still followed him, both on his body and in his mind, but here, in this quiet community, he thought he had finally carved out a sanctuary. But trouble had a way of finding Marcus, even when he wasn't looking for it. The neighborhood was governed, or rather, strangled, by a self-proclaimed homeowners association. Except this wasn't the usual HOA that collected dues for lawn care or pool maintenance. This group was a cluster of entitled neighbors led by a handful of bullies who believed they controlled everything. They were notorious for targeting people they didn't like, and Marcus, being one of the very few black homeowners in the area, had been on their radar since the day he moved in. That evening, Marcus noticed a white SUV creeping down the street. It pulled up directly in front of his driveway, blocking the sidewalk. 3 men stepped out, all wearing dark tactical uniforms with shiny badges stitched onto their chests. The words, HOA Enforcement Division, were printed in bold across the back of their vests. Their boots hit the pavement with an intentional stomp, meant to intimidate. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had seen real law enforcement, real operators. These men, their movements were sloppy, their uniforms were mismatched, the stitching uneven, and their equipment was cheap knockoffs. Still, their goal was obvious: scare him into submission. "Evenin', Mr. Johnson," the tallest of the 3 said, his voice slick with arrogance. "We're here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. You've been found in violation of multiple community codes. Effective immediately, you're being evicted from the property." Marcus took a slow sip of his tea, set the glass down on the porch railing, and looked them straight in the eye. "Evicted? By who? Last time I checked, HOA can't issue evictions. And you sure as hell aren't sheriffs." The second man, stockier and red-faced, puffed out his chest. "We have authority. You either pack up tonight or face legal consequences. We'll remove you ourselves if we have to." Marcus chuckled, though his jaw was tight. "Authority? I've seen men with real authority. You boys are playing dress up." The leader stepped closer, his hand brushing the butt of a holstered pistol. "This doesn't have to get messy, sir. Cooperate, and we won't have to escalate." For a moment, Marcus's mind flashed back to Fallujah, to nights when the air reeked of smoke and danger. His instincts sharpened. He knew intimidation tactics when he saw them. These men weren't here to talk. They wanted to force him out, humiliate him, maybe worse. "Let me be clear," Marcus said calmly, though his voice carried the weight of command. "You're trespassing on private property. You've got 60 seconds to leave before I call the real cops." The 3 exchanged glances, whispering to each other. They weren't used to resistance. Usually, their uniforms and fake badges were enough to scare neighbors into silence. But Marcus wasn't an ordinary neighbor. The red-faced one sneered. "Big man with a big mouth. Maybe we show him we mean business." That was their mistake. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a contact labeled simply, "Team." His message was short: "Need you at the house. Now." He didn't need to explain further. The bond forged. In combat went deeper than words. Within minutes, the sound of engines echoed down the street. Black pickup trucks and motorcycles rolled in, one after another, their headlights slicing through the twilight. 6 men stepped out, each one built like a fortress, moving with quiet precision. No uniforms, no theatrics, just the unmistakable aura of warriors who had been through hell and back. These were his brothers, fellow Navy SEALs who had fought beside him overseas. The fake HOA cops froze. Their swagger vanished as the 6 SEALs formed a loose semicircle around Marcus's porch, eyes locked on the intruders. The leader's hand twitched nervously near his holster, but even he knew better than to draw. One of the SEALs, a tall man with a shaved head and cold gray eyes, stepped forward. His voice was low but lethal. "You've got 5 seconds to get off this property before you find out what a real eviction feels like." The street went silent. Even the crickets seemed to pause. Marcus folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "So, gentlemen, what's it gonna be?" The fake cops glanced at each other, sweat dripping down their temples. Their bluster had carried them through countless petty power trips, but this was different. They weren't facing a scared homeowner. They were staring down 6 battle-hardened SEALs ready to protect one of their own. And suddenly, the game wasn't so fun anymore. The 3 fake officers hesitated on the curb, their bravado draining as they realized the situation had slipped beyond their control. They were used to bluffing frightened homeowners into submission, but this wasn't a trembling suburban family. Marcus stood calm and steady, and the 6 SEALs who flanked him radiated a quiet danger, the kind only men trained in real combat could project. The tall leader licked his lips, his eyes darting between Marcus and the men who had just arrived. "This isn't what it looks like," he said finally, his voice faltering. "We're just here to enforce community standards. There's no need for this kind of response." One of the SEALs, a wiry man with tattoos crawling up his arms, stepped closer. His eyes didn't blink as he looked at the imposters. "Community standards don't come with sidearms and fake badges. You've got about 2 seconds to stop talking before I make sure the sheriff's department gets a call with your license plate number." The stocky man who had been puffing his chest earlier now looked pale. His hand hovered near his belt, but his courage had already failed him. He muttered something under his breath and took half a step back. Marcus finally broke the silence. "You see, here's the problem," he said evenly. "You thought you could intimidate me into giving up what I built. But you didn't do your homework. You didn't ask who lives here. And you sure as hell didn't expect brothers like mine to show up." The men shuffled uneasily, their cheap boots scuffed against the pavement. The tall one, still clinging to his role as leader, tried once more. "Look, we don't want trouble. Maybe we—" The shaved head SEAL cut him off, stepping so close that the man flinched. "You're already in trouble. What you did tonight wasn't just intimidation. It's impersonating law enforcement, trespassing, attempted coercion. If we wanted, we could pin half a dozen felonies on you before dawn." He tilted his head toward Marcus. "Your only mercy is that he's calmer than we are." For a long moment, the imposters stood frozen, weighing whether to run, argue, or draw. But the truth was written in their eyes. They were cowards playing soldiers. Against real warriors, they had no chance. Finally, the red-faced one turned on his heel and muttered, "Let's go." His 2 partners hesitated but followed, retreating to their SUV like dogs with their tails tucked. The vehicle's tires squealed as it reversed and sped away, leaving behind only the faint stink of burnt rubber and failure. The neighborhood, which had seemed deserted a few minutes earlier, now hummed with life. Curtains twitched, blinds rattled, and porch lights clicked on as neighbors peeked out to witness the spectacle. For months, many of them had suffered under the fake HOA's bullying, afraid to speak out. Tonight, they had seen someone stand his ground, and win. Marcus exhaled slowly, tension slipping from his shoulders. One of the SEALs clapped him on the back. "You handled that better than most, brother. You still got that steel spine from the teams." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Didn't do it alone. Couldn't have." The men lingered for a while, talking in low voices, keeping an eye on the street. One pulled out a phone and contacted a friend in the sheriff's department, providing a description of the SUV and the names they knew. Another SEAL quietly walked the perimeter of Marcus's property, making sure nothing had been tampered with. Their instincts, honed by years of protecting one another in hostile territory, didn't switch off just because they were back home. As the adrenaline ebbed, Marcus looked around at his neighbors' homes. He knew tomorrow the whispers would start. Stories of what had happened, exaggerated tales about the army that had arrived on his lawn. But maybe, just maybe, the intimidation that had gripped this community was broken. The bullies had been exposed as frauds. Before leaving, the shaved head SEAL leaned in close to Marcus. "Don't think this is over. Men like that. Once they're embarrassed, they try to come back harder. But we've got your six. Call us again if they so much as drive past your house. Marcus nodded, his voice quiet but firm. I won't hesitate. When the trucks and bikes finally rolled away, the street grew silent once more. Marcus stood alone on his porch, his glass of iced tea still resting where he had left it. He picked it up, took a long sip, and stared into the shadows where the SUV had disappeared. The imposters had been run off for now, but Marcus knew this wasn't the end. Men who thrived on power and fear didn't just vanish, they regrouped. And something told him they wouldn't stop until they tried again. But if they did, he would be ready. And this time, he wasn't alone.